Red Sister is about a little girl who trains to become an assassin nun. Well, more assassin than nun. Hi, I'm David Desro, and today I'm going to be reviewing Red Sister by Mark Lawrence. So the book description is, "It's not until you're broken that you find your sharpest edge. I was born for killing. The gods made me to ruin. At the convent of Sweet Mercy, young girls are raised to be killers. In a few the old bloods show, gifting talents rarely seen since the tribes beached their ships on Abbott. Sweet Mercy hones its novices' skills to deadly effect. It takes 10 years to educate a Red Sister in the ways of the blade and fist, but even the mistresses of sword and shadow don't truly understand what they have purchased when Nona Gray is brought to their halls as a blood-stained child of 8, falsely accused of murder, guilty or worse." Red Sister is about a little girl named Nona Gray, who is given away at a young age and finds herself at the Sweet Mercy Nurses Convent, where they train kids with special abilities to become assassin nuns, basically. Red Sister is a story of finding a new family, finding new enemies. It's also a story of revenge, a story of rage, of trust. There's a lot going on in this story, and we're going to break it down. Let's get into it. There's a few things you should know before jumping into this story. It's adult fantasy, dark fantasy, borderline grimdark fantasy. It has a 3.08 on the unofficial grimdark rating scale on Mark Lawrence's blog, which is voted on by readers. The scale goes up to 5, and this one is just slightly above 3, so it's real borderline if you're looking for a grimdark book. It's in that direction, at least. If you're reading Red Sister, there's a good chance you've already read the Broken Empire trilogy, as well as the Red Queen's War trilogy, and both of those start off, like Prince of Thorns and Prince of Fools, both start off with a story that's an adventure. The main character is traveling really far to try to do something. And in Red Sister, that is not the case. Nona Gray gets to the training academy pretty early on in the story, and that's where she stays the entire story. So that might be a little bit of a spoiler, but I feel like it's important to understand that's what's going to happen going into this book, because if you go in expecting adventure, you're going to be bored. You're going to be like, okay, when are they going to leave? When are they going to go somewhere else or do something else? They're not. That's not to say it's bad. A lot of really interesting things happen at the academy. They occasionally will leave the academy and come right back, but that is where the meat, that is where the bulk of the story is going to take place. Also, there's a decent amount of violence, which it's a story about assassins, so that should go without saying. But if you were for some reason you're like, oh man, I hope there's no violence in it, well, you're going to be disappointed, I guess. Okay, next we have our prose check. Now, Mark Lawrence is an established author by this point. He always passes the prose check. Mark Lawrence's prose is very literal and transparent. He's not going to let his prose get in the way of the story, but he also knows when to turn the dial and slow the pace all the way to a standstill just to describe a single moment. And then all of a sudden he turns into Anna Smith Spark. He just gets poetic and gets really lost in the moment, and it's amazing. I love it. For example, when even in the prologue here, all the world and more has rushed eternity's length to reach this beat of your heart, screaming down the years. And if you let it, the universe, without drawing breath, will press itself through the fractured second and race to the next, on into a new eternity. Everything that is, the echoes of everything that ever was, the root of all that will ever be, must pass through this moment that you own. Your only task is to give it pause, to make it notice. There are times where you could slow down and stop everything and just be totally in that moment, and it's great. I feel like Lawrence has found a really good rhythm as far as when to speed things up and slow it down. Another thing you should know is Mark Lawrence is the kind of writer that will give you just the bare minimum of what you need to know in order for the story to progress. I like that kind of writing. I know some people have issues with that, but you'll get just what you need, just enough to keep going and just enough to know, okay, he'll let you know just enough to keep the story rolling. but nothing else. He's not going to like info dump all this extra stuff. And if you're expecting a ton of extra world building, like the world building will be kind of laced in there with the, with teachers and classes and things like that, or casual conversations, and it'll be snuck in. He's not going to over explain things. He's not going to give you a bunch of unnecessary details, which I like. Is the protagonist easy to root for? Yes. I feel like Lawrence is great at making you root for characters even when they're severely flawed. In Nona's case, she's one of the least flawed characters I think Lawrence has written, as far as like, if you've read Prince of Thorns, Jorg Ankrath, Prince Jalin. If you've read Jorg and Jalin's stories, those guys are far more flawed. Nona has some issues that she has to deal with, but at the end of the day, she's a little kid who's basically an orphan, and she has some incredible gifts. And really powerful people want to kill her. So you definitely want to root for her. I wanted her to win, overcome all the obstacles. I was definitely on her side pretty early on. Are the antagonists easy to root against? Yes. Even minor antagonists, like there's the main one, but then there's also some lesser villains. I don't want to call them villains. There's some lesser antagonists. One of them in particular does something to where like you hate this person immediately. Can't talk about it without spoiling anything, so I'm not going to go into details in this video. But man, they do something, you're like, oh well, I hate that one. But out of all of the antagonists, yes, they are typically really easy to root against. Even the main antagonist, it does something pretty early on into the story where you understand why Nona hates this person. You get it. There's no like, oh man, I wonder I wonder why she doesn't like this individual. No, there's no, it's not ambiguous. It's very clear, cut and dry. Now, because this is a fantasy novel, we have to ask, what is the magic like? And in this, the way magic works in this world is some people are just born with special abilities, and there's 4 types of special ability. Can we just take a moment to appreciate that Mark Lawrence puts the appendix in the front of the book? You won't be able to see that, but there's an appendix within the first few pages. Great. I love that idea. I hope more writers do that. There are 4 different types of gifts in this world that you can be born with. You can be born a gerent, which makes you much bigger, which basically makes you huge. You're just bigger than everybody. There's Hanska, which makes you incredibly fast, and that's what Nona is. There's Margil, which lets you tap into the lesser magics, and there's Quantul, which lets you tap into the greater magics. Now the first 2, being incredibly fast or incredibly large, I don't know if that counts as magic. That's just something unusual in this world. And not everybody's born with these abilities. And even the people who are have touch or a pinch, or you're full, or basically you can be a quarter, half, 3/4, or 100% of whatever type you might be born into. For example, a Hanska who has half won't be as fast as a full Hanska. The Margil and Quantul groups have a lot more range as far as manipulating shadows and walking the path, which I think is some kind of way to go into another dimension. They briefly talk about demons possibly being in that dimension, I guess. I don't want to spoil anything, but there may be demons in that other dimension who are able to cross over. They don't go into like very specific details with the magic. Like the characters show off the kinds of magics they can do, and it doesn't always explain how and why that magic can work. Some of it does, like some of it has to do with how serene you can be, how balanced you are, how much you meditate. Other things are a little less clear. And again, because it is a fantasy novel, I feel like we have to talk about the world building. So Red Sister takes place in Abath, which is basically a giant alleyway across the planet. And on both sides are huge blocks of ice, and the sun is basically dying and gives off very little heat. And it's just enough is coming down on that strip of land that gets smaller and smaller as time goes on. And that's where Nona grew up. That's where that's where all the people are, is in this little strip of land. And you have people who live like on the edges of the ice, who are a little more wild. You have basically a kingdom in which the nuns serve the king, The nuns are part of the church that also serves the king. There's a little bit of politics and power struggles kind of dropped in here and is kind of in the background of everything going on. Constantly gets brought up and hinted at and talked about who's in control, who really has the power in this world. Most of the story takes place at the Sweet Mercy convent where they train the nuns to be assassins. Most of the story takes place in classes or a training ground or a fighting ring. And also friendships play a big part in this. So Nona Gray and her group of friends, they have a good dynamic as far as they're friends, but there's enough conflict there to keep those scenes interesting and keep the story moving along. You can tell this is the first book of a trilogy because it feels like a lot of setup. We're building the Fellowship of the Ring in this book, and then in book 2 and 3, they go on an adventure, is what I'm assuming. I haven't read book 2 yet, but I hear it's really good. Okay, one of the most important questions. Does it stick the landing? Yes, absolutely. I think the last chapter, plus the epilogue, plus the teaser for the next book are all they're so good, it's almost unfair to have them back to back to back. Those 3 chapters combined, make everything worth it. Throughout the book, there are times where it does get a little slow, and you're kind of like, me personally, I was like, well, when's the adventure gonna start? Or when are they gonna leave the academy? Are they gonna be here the whole time? I didn't know, which is why I feel it's important to mention, yes, they are there pretty much the whole time. There's enough moments spread throughout the book that are incredibly rewarding. All of the fight scenes are great, some of the best I've seen. Mark Lawrence really nails each and every fight scene in this book. And the last chapter, which is very long, is phenomenal. Not to mention the epilogue and the teaser for the next one. Just I'm telling you, those 3 in a row. That's like if you watch baseball, that's the middle, that's the 3rd, 4th, and 5th batter right there. That is the heart of the lineup. All the heavy hitters right there, just back to back to back. It just works so well, and it makes me feel rewarded for sticking it through some of the slower parts. And it definitely has me excited for the next book, which is what the end of the book is absolutely supposed to do. And now that I feel like we got a lot of the setup out of the way, I imagine that the next book will be even better. As far as a rating goes, I have to give this a 5 out of 5. One, I think on a technical level, it's really well done. But on a personal level, I just really like Lawrence's style. I think Nona is a fantastic character. There's absolutely a worthy opponent going up against her. The action is so well done. The magic's really cool. And the ending was great. Yeah, for me, it has to be 5 out of 5. Have you read Red Sister? Let me know what you think. If you've read it, down in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. But yeah, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it down in the comments below. Until next time, later.